Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And this is the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast. Today, our guest is Alison Kenney Paul, someone that I have admired for a long time because I have watched this woman come into any environment and win over any amount of people because she's real. She's got so much internal power and she makes you want to invest in her, both so that you all are successful together, but so that she's successful too. Alison is a true superstar, and I'm so glad to have you here, Alison.
Thank you, Fawn and Michelle. It's great to be here. Alison Kenney Paul. I'm the Global Managing Director of Partnerships at Google.
And before that?
And prior to that, I was a partner at Deloitte for almost 20 years. I ran the U.S. retail practice, and I ran one of the largest client relationships, Walmart globally for Deloitte.
So
and before that,
oh, yeah, right. And before that, go ahead.
And before that, I did a bunch of startups in the 90s and early 2000s. Some were successful, some not so much, learned a lot there. And I started my career at Procter & Gamble in the 80s, in the dark ages, and worked at IRI for a while, which is a market research company in the consumer goods and retail business. But all of my career, the one thing that is constant is I've always been around retailers and CPG companies. That's really what my background is.
The thing that I love about what you do is you find quickly your way of being most effective in any environment. And I think your story of where you came from and how you got where you eventually went is so inspiring. So let's start there. Were you born into this kind of success?
You know, Fawn, I appreciate the question, but I do come from fairly humble beginnings. So I'm a second generation, grew up in New England. My mom didn't go to college. Her dad didn't believe in girls going to college. And I it makes me sad to think that she missed out on that. But I was the first cousin of all of us girls to go to college, complete college. And I got into some great private schools, but we didn't have any money. So I went to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, this big, giant university, because that's what we could afford. But when I got there, I realized it was the perfect place for me to be because I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. And a small school of 3,000 students wasn't going to give me all of the variety of experiences I needed to have. So I went to college, and I will tell you this one story. My mom, who didn't go to college, I called her about a month before finals, and I said, I have to quit my first semester. I have to quit. There's no way I'm going to pass these tests. I just looked at the reading that's involved, and there is no way, even if I stay up 24 hours a day, I can read all this and be prepared for these finals. And she said, stop. What did you learn about all this? What have you learned? Because you're in college, not to learn the topic, but to learn how to learn for the rest of your life. And so what I learned was you don't spend 3/4 of the semester partying with all your friends. You actually might crack a book earlier and get down to business. So I loved my college career. I spent more time doing things that weren't really academic. I joined every club, and every club, as Fawn, you won't be surprised to learn this, usually ended up being the president or the chairperson or whatever, because I never saw an organization I didn't want to run. And so it was a great experience. And that led me to Procter & Gamble, because they didn't recruit from the business school. They recruited whoever the leaders on campus were.
What happened at the end of that semester?
I got the lowest cum that I ever got, but I got through all those exams. I didn't get kicked out. I didn't fail. I got a very mediocre, but I got through it, and I ended up with a great average by the time I got out of college. I have learned a bunch of things. I also learned how to take classes, how to select classes. What I realized was I had selected way too many classes that had way too much reading involved. I needed classes where, like, what do you do? Can you do something like give a presentation or write a short paper or whatever? but reading books and books and books, I was never going to get it all done. So I also learned what could I really manage in a semester to absorb. I mean, these were 5 courses that were all huge reading courses. It was like history of Latin America. Like, what the heck was I doing in this class? Psych 101. The book was this thick. So I did learn a bunch of things about my own capacity and limitations, as well as what was most comfortable for me to learn.
So the learning, if what we get in school is preparation for the first day on the job, which if we're lucky, that's what we get. Your mom told you that and she nailed it. You really are there to learn. And you learned how to get into organizations and to lead. So if you were going to take the hard-won wisdom you got from all of that experience and show how that translated into later success, what did you learn there?
So I learned, it's funny. I learned some things my first year of working that I remember like yesterday, and yet I can't recall what someone told me yesterday. It's really amazing how like your early lessons stay with you. And so when I got to P&G, which was a fantastic place to work because they did invest in training you and schooling you. I say I got my MBA at P&G because I didn't know anything about business. I was a liberal arts major. I could, barely use a calculator when I got there. So I get there and I had a fantastic manager who was just a year or two older than me. Her name also was Alison. So we were the Alisons in New England selling toothpaste together. And she would say to me, just be yourself, talk to these people about, and you basically had to call on 12 grocery stores a day and sell more Crest toothpaste or Scope mouthwash or whatever it was. And so I'm talking to a guy unloading 50-pound bags of dog food off of the back of a truck, telling him he really needs to order more Crest because there's a big coupon coming in the Boston Globe. And she would just, one, it was about persistence, like hanging in there, not being put off by the gruff store manager who didn't really appear to be very interested, telling him what it was in it for him, like I'll build the display, I'll help you do the order, this will increase your margin by X%. And then listening to that person, listening to their objections and understanding if they could do it or not. And sometimes I'd sell it and sometimes I wouldn't. But that 12 times a day, probably my hit rate was 25%. All those rejections started to show me, I didn't say that quite right, or I didn't listen at the right time, or maybe I should come back at a different time of the day when this person isn't so stressed. I started to understand what worked and what didn't. And I wish every organization could give everyone 12 times a day to learn and fail and learn again. But they don't. A lot of organizations throw people into a sales thing and say, here's the template to follow, and here's how you do it, and these are the benefits, and these are the features. And the wonderful thing about P&G is they just let me be out there doing it and learning it, and they would help me. But it was the trial and error of learning and hearing my own voice when it would be most effective, and then using that learning on the next call and the next call and so on. So I really credit a lot of my success, all of my success, to those early days. The other thing that happened is I had a couple of times where people would ask me a question that I didn't know the answer to, or I had to make a decision about something that I didn't feel fully confident making. But I was it. This was me. I was the sales rep, right? And so I would make that decision, and I would call my manager later, and I'd say to her, did I do the right thing? And whether I did the right thing or not, she said, we're paying you to make decisions, Alison. So, next time let's do it this way, or that was the right thing to do. But she did 2 things for me there. One, she showed me how much the company valued me. Like I wasn't just a robot. I was a thinking, feeling human being that was making decisions. But also she gave me confidence. Like, no, that's your job. You go and do that. And part of it was too, it was low risk. I couldn't really make a terrible decision. I wasn't in charge of that much stuff. But that's a muscle that you develop. Making decisions is not something that is easy for everyone. You're not born necessarily knowing how to do it. But practice helps you get better at it.
I think you're raising such a great point of the discipline around consistency and persistence, because I think so many women just really they kind of get frozen, right? They
Yeah.
freeze in place, struggle to make a decision because they may make the wrong one. They're looking for lots of information. They want to be 100%, whether it's looking for a job, whether it's making a decision at work. How have what are some tips that you would say as a leader that someone could apply with their own teams to help create this type of environment?
So, Michelle, thank you for the question. When I first made partner at Deloitte, another partner, someone who had been a partner a few years ahead of me, said to me, "Now I'm going to give you a piece of advice. This is great advice, by the way. Never make a mistake by yourself." And
Brilliant.
isn't that great?
Yeah.
And as you can see, I still do that today. I am not so smart that I know all the angles of the answer. I can't know everything about it. So, and I'm very willing, by the way, if no one cares who gets the credit, then we will win, right? So I am fine with saying to my colleagues, "What do you think of this idea?" And being open enough to listen to, "That's a crazy idea, Alison," or "I would adjust it this way," or "I think it is a good idea." And usually I try to get that in writing so that if it is a terrible idea, I can say, "Remember when we talked about this? Like, why did you think it was a good idea?" But the bottom line is, and I think this is the blessing of being a woman. I am not confident enough or arrogant enough to think I always know the answer and I have all the facts. There's no way I can. So I'm humble enough to go, what does somebody else think about this? Maybe what does a few somebody else's think about this? And we'll make the decision. And I will tell you, I couldn't make decisions without doing that. And if it makes me look indecisive sometimes, I can live with that. Because I do also feel like your perspective is just your perspective. It's not other people's perspective. So even if I'm right about what I'm doing, I also want to understand where other people are coming from, because usually when you're making a decision, you need others to buy in to make it successful. And by bringing them into this, and this is a consulting change management thing, you get everyone to buy in by asking their opinion. And the minute they start speaking publicly about, "Yeah, I think this is a pretty good idea," you have got them psychologically bought into the whole idea. So I never make a mistake by myself. I make it in groups.
Speaking of groups, one of your strengths definitely is your ability to go in and network, not only working a room to meet people, but working a room to create business and success. And you have that one story, I hope you can tell that, about turning new into your golf course and when you really killed it the first time.
So, Fawn, thank you for saying that. But it's so the Network of Executive Women, which I was involved with at the very start, I came to naturally. My mother was a very pro-woman woman, and she always said to me, "Don't get married too young, have your own money, get your education, and you can do anything else." And I really believe, and I believe that is so important for young people, to really feel like everybody around them believes in them, because, I wasn't the smartest kid in the class. I wasn't the prettiest. I wasn't the anythingest, but I knew that I had the backing of my family and my parents, and in particular, my mom. And so when the Network of Executive Women, when I got on the board of the Network of Executive Women, I was sitting in a board meeting in 2005, and I was new to it. And I was sitting next to the CIO of Walmart at the time. And it was a week after Hurricane Katrina. So some of your listeners may not remember that, but I'm sure you two ladies remember that really well. And I turned to Linda and I said to her, and literally, Deloitte was just getting to know Walmart. We didn't have much of a relationship. We didn't do a lot of work with Walmart. Walmart was not much of a user of professional services. And I said, Linda, is there anything we can be doing to help you? They had 100 stores closed and a bunch of DCs closed. And I'm not even sure I knew what I was offering at the time. I just was being another woman sitting next to someone who, had a lot going on. And she said, I don't know, Alison, but let me think about that. I really appreciate you making that offer. And that began a dialogue and a relationship where she and I got to do some great things together as colleagues between our two companies. And the reason that people join in together and do things together, whether it is for money or for a nonprofit or, is because they trust each other. And the reason they trust each other is because the investment was made in the relationship at the beginning. It wasn't a place where people said, how can I benefit from this relationship? They started with the relationship. And that was my expectation, was just to get to know her and understand, how could we help? Could we help? And it turned into, and literally, that's how I operate. I get to know people. Everyone has a story to tell. Everybody has something interesting to say. Everybody knows something I don't know. They have a different perspective than I do. And I don't go into it thinking, what can I get out of this person? I go into it thinking, what can I do for this person so that someday they might say, I wonder what I could do for Alison. It's a pay it forward kind of philosophy.
But that was a huge sea change event. You sitting there with her, doing that, following up. Can you talk about how big that was and what that translated for your career?
So it was because we didn't have much of a relationship with them, it started to turn into a much more substantial relationship. And so to this day, Walmart and Deloitte are great partners in all kinds of things. And I have to be careful what I say, because it's a client service relationship, but they are a highly valued client of Deloitte's. And I believe, and as I was retiring, I was told this by many of the colleagues that I worked with there in Bentonville, that they really valued what I and the team brought to them. And, honestly, I considered it more than a business relationship. It was a partnership. It was an alliance. And you have to earn that every day. You have to, you're only as good as the last project you did or the last interaction you had. But I was honored to be a part of that organization from a supplier standpoint and from an advisor standpoint. So yes, it turned into a very nice relationship between the two of us. And frankly, even if it hadn't, that happened to be sort of the icing on top. I went in with the objective of understanding that organization and if we could be helpful. If the result had been, there's nothing really we can do here, there isn't really a lot of opportunity I still would have met a bunch of amazing people and learned about one of the largest companies in the world, how they operate, what they do, how they do it so well. So it's not like there wasn't a benefit anyway. And I take that very seriously in everything that I do, is like, until I know more about the people that I'm working with, the organization that I'm interacting with, I can't know what all the possibilities are. They could be huge.
And well, this was millions and millions of dollars huge. So when you are mentoring, and I'm going to say women, because I think men don't think twice about asking for a favor or really, calling in a chit, but women are reluctant to do that. So if you're going to mentor someone on how to really leverage a network into making you more successful, not just doing nice things for them so that, that the relationship goes, but how do you teach people to be courageous and actually turn it into something meaningful?
Couple of things, Fawn. I think that there's mentoring and then there's sponsoring, right? They're different things. So I've had a bunch of mentors in my life, and they were people who said things to me as un-PC today as that skirt's too short. You're distracting the people you're presenting to by wearing that. That was said to me a long time ago, but it was probably good advice, because I probably wasn't getting taken seriously because of that outfit. Although I probably thought I was the cutest thing in shoe leather, but that's beside the point. All the way through to let me help you work that presentation differently, or let me help you do this or that. So I've had mentors who have run the gamut. A lot of them were men, because I'm old enough that there weren't many women senior to me where I was, right? By the way, I also grew up with all brothers, and this isn't for everybody, but I could talk on a Monday morning about the Sunday, football games with the best of them. I don't think that hurt me. I think, and I think relating to boys all my life growing up made me perhaps less alien in a world where there were very few women. I always felt being a woman was an advantage because people remembered my name. I wasn't one of 75 mics in the room. So there's that. In terms of giving young people, and this goes for men and women, advice, but you're right, women tend to not ask. Sometimes you have to do what you're least comfortable doing. Like you just have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. It is not easy to sell and ask people for something knowing there's a good possibility they're going to say no, or asking somebody, please, can you sponsor me on this? Or could you mention me on this topic? Because you are opening yourself up. You're being vulnerable and there's a chance they will reject you. That's not easy for any human being. That's not a good feeling. But in my estimation, you have to do that which is not comfortable for you. And guess what? It does two things. One, you get the answer, and one way or the other. And by the way, you should, I think, prepare for the second answer, which is what could I do if you can't do it now, could you do it sometime in the future, right? Like maybe it's not no, it's just not now. But the other thing too is you're practicing that you're using that muscle that says, I'm going to go out on a limb and do this. And the more you do that, the less scary it is. It becomes something that you start building a habit and building a muscle that can do that over and over again. And that builds confidence, which makes you feel better about the ask. And you're not a lesser person because you got no as an answer. And so what I do also try to do today is I have lots and lots of young women friends who will say to me, can I have 20 minutes? Can I have 15 minutes? Would you mind if I ran this idea? And I try to say yes all the time because I don't want to put those young women off. Like I'm too busy for them. Like, particularly like young women at Deloitte, they're going to pay my pension into the future because hopefully they're going to be successful. So I do was kind of an ulterior motive, but the bottom line is people gave me that, I should give it as well. And what's really funny? When you are doing for other people, you feel so much better about yourself at the end of the day.
I love this. And I want to spend a little bit more time on this asking piece because I think women, again, particularly hear this, just go ask. Are there ways or thoughts that you have that you can share in terms of how to ask or how you might like to be asked by someone, whether it's mentoring, whether it's the deal, but how to ask in a way that feels more comfortable?
So I started to go there, Michelle, and I'm glad you are digging into this a little bit more because I think part of the asking is making it easy to say yes, right? Like, how do you get to yes? So I have a few young women who regularly ask me, and now I've become friends with them, and so I'm glad to hear from them and so on. And one, make it a really digestible ask, right? Like, don't ask for an hour of somebody's time. Like, it's 2022, right? Nobody spends an hour doing anything today. Make it a 15-minute conversation. And it will be so much easier for someone to say yes. And maybe you will run out of time, but it will be obvious to both of you, and maybe you set up a subsequent call or whatever. Two, I think if you're a little bit specific and somewhat flattering, you probably, you get more flies with honey. Know your subject. Like if you see that someone in their background has great banking experience or sales experience or whatever you say, I noticed in your LinkedIn that you do X, Y, and Z. Would you mind telling me a little bit more about that and how I might apply that to my career or my life? I think that is a way to show that you're not just randomly dialing for advice. You actually, there's something about this person that's appealing and interesting to you, and you've done a little homework. Everybody's flattered to know that, like, hey, they looked me up online and they read my LinkedIn. Wow, like, at least I am. I'm kind of a sucker for that sort of thing. And then I think the third thing is, and I make this my practice, and I've literally had CEOs be like kind of gobsmacked when I've said this, is at the end, you say, thank you. What can I do to help you?
Yes.
Okay. Like, is there anything I can do? And you might talk to a CEO about how they got their success for 15 minutes, and that's like an amazing moment. But that CEO, man or woman, probably has a kid who needs mentoring, and they can't get through to them because they're the parent. So they say, you know what? I might have my son call you or my daughter call you to talk to you about.
So I use this too. And I will tell you, it has led to some of the most amazing, again, long-term relationships, because everything you've described so far has been around making an investment into the long game. It may not be with this person particularly, but somewhere this connection leads you somewhere else. So the moment you are making it quick and transactional, you've lost. So this investment piece is really great. And I second that. It's created some magical moments for me. So I'm so glad you shared that trick.
And people like to be thanked, right? It's very old fashioned, but manners count. So, please, thank you. And what else can I do? I have a big belief that you don't show up at someone's house without flowers or a bottle of wine or like a nice hostess gift, right? I was raised right. And so what can you do with that? Like in the business world, what can you bring to the party, and let that person tell you what it is, and see if you can, whether it's making a connection or helping or whatever. It's really, I think it's really important. Fawn knows Kim File, a CMO, board member, great lady. She's a big believer in this as well, about like, what are you bringing to your ask? What's your, gift in the process? And it doesn't have to be anything expensive or a big offer. Even just the act of offering is what says, I want to have a relationship with you, not just a transaction with you.
Someone do something as simple as like an elder executive. Can you show me a little bit about how to use some of the social media tools back when they were early? I mean, we were meeting with the C-suite executives at that time because they did not know, but we did. So there was this mutual sharing of
like reverse mentoring, right?
Yes, reverse. And yes.
What Michelle said about long term, I really do believe. I'm not sure I always thought in the long term, but my dad was I think I get some of this from my dad. He would talk to anybody, and he would have the best stories. Okay, he was an electrical engineer, but in the end, he was an account manager for the Boston Edison company, and he had the best stories about clients. And some of his clients were really like interesting places, like Fenway Park was one of his customers, and New England Telephone was one of his customers. But he'd tell these stories about these people that he would meet. And a lot of times it was the receptionist or the secretary or somebody who was really the gatekeeper to the rest of the organization, right? And he always saw the humor in everything. He was very funny. I grew up on the Three Stooges. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but that's, I told you, all brothers, right? And also he saw the humanity in everybody. And he would literally, he would come home with these stories. I thought they were wonderful, right? Because I think people are the most interesting things on earth. Like as much as I think I can prejudge people, I see someone walk through the door and I think I know everything about them, I'm usually dead wrong about like 9/10 of it. So that's what's so interesting. If you have curiosity about people, you will go far.
One thing I was going to ask, because I've noticed this about senior people and continue with your idea about showing up with something when you go to someone's house, is that the ability to display your manners apparently increases or has a bigger presence in the people that higher up. I always get handwritten letters from people who have no time to write a handwritten letter, and I never do that. Like, do you send thank you notes? And what is this about big manners that translates into bigger success?
That's so interesting, Fawn, that you should say that. I don't handwrite notes so much anymore. Although I do, but my handwriting's terrible.
Yeah, mine too. That's
Mine too.
part of the problem.
Writing.
We're out of practice, and I never had great penmanship. But it's funny. I got a handwritten thank you note at Christmas time from our neighbors across the street, and it was that beautiful Palmer
Cursive.
method, penmanship. I was like, oh man, that's I never learned that.
Right.
But I think manners are about respecting the individual, the other person on the other side of this, and I think, quite frankly, our manners as a country, as a society, are poor right now. Insulting people, no please, no thank you, making demands, mine, like, no wonder people aren't getting along. Like, a little bit of respect, a little bit of manners, and they're undervalued, and I think they punch way above their weight when you use them. It can literally, and the other thing too is, every time you have a transaction, every time you have a dialogue with someone, it could just be a transaction. I want this, you want that. Like, are we settled on it? Or it can be the beginning of building a foundation of a longer term relationship, and that requires a little bit more care than just the transaction.
I know, even when I left my last company, I wrote thank you notes to not only my executive team, but to a lot of the supporting team members. Like, there are some people that they helped make me successful. And it was just a simple gesture meant a lot, right? Right. Where it was heartfelt. And, you don't normally think about doing that when you're leaving, but I mean, sometimes, even after an onboarding process, maybe the team members who've trained you to get ready for the job and you've started the job, and you can go back and say thank you to the person that helped prepare you. I mean, those are simple things that, again, I go back and describe it as you're investing and you're nurturing very deep roots with people and your relationships.
That's right.
So, Alison, you have this terminology for how you do this, and it's about your golf course.
Yes. Yes.
Can you please share people, because the golf course kind of sounds like what you were at that phase of your life in college. So what is Alison's golf course?
So true confession, tried to golf. My husband and I were just talking about this not too long ago. He tried to learn golf too. One trip to a golf course together, I was crying by like hole 4. Okay. No hand-eye coordination. I was never an athlete. I'm pre-Title IX, so I never played any sports at school. Like, I'm a geek. I have longish legs, so I can probably run away from a bear, but that's about as athletic as I get. And so,
well, it's good to have that skill.
Right, exactly. Although I wouldn't want to test it right now. So, anyway, as people would talk about golfing together and doing business, I'd be like, oh my God, that's like never going to happen for me. And the network of executive women, and quite frankly, I'm now part of several networks of women, the IWF, International Women's Forum, and I'm on the board of Girls Inc. This is a thread through my whole life. Those are my golf courses. The network of executive women was my golf course. We get together, we'd be together probably not even 4 hours, less than what it would take to play 18 holes, right? And we would get to know each other. We might have a few drinks. We might have a nice meal, might do a whole bunch of other things. And over the course of those 2 and 3 and 4 hour get-togethers, when we would all be together for a conference or a board meeting or a planning meeting, and I will give this advice to any woman. It's one thing to join an organization. It's a whole other level to join the leadership of an organization, a committee, the board, become an officer. That's when you form the really great relationships, because you're in there together working on a common purpose and learning about each other at a really intimate level and literally going through it together. That's how you build relationships. Showing up for a day at a conference is great, and that's a lot of fun and everything. And that is sort of more like golf. It's a little bit more casual. But when you run the country club together, then you get some stuff done, okay? And then you build really long-lasting relationships. I mean, Fawn, I know you because we were literally planning those events together. And we were figuring out who's on the panel and who should the speakers be, and does this fit before or after? And it was that give and take that allowed us to get to know each other. But what we all started with was the same goal and the same set of values, which is we want to help women be successful here. So right off the bat, you've eliminated all the riffraff that you don't want around, because if they don't believe in that as a purpose, well, yeah, don't join us, right? But that absolutely new was my golf course, and it was a lot cheaper than a golf course. And dollar for dollar, I got way more ROI than, and plus I didn't like golf, right? It was just not going to happen. So I recommend, and I say this to women all the time. Women ask me how do you do that? And how do you have time for that? I'm like, here's the other secret. It was a great 2-for-1. It was both a bunch of friends.
Yeah, right.
And fun. And they were all like business executives. And the people who I started in the business with, all of a sudden one day I turned around, they were the decision makers at all these places. They were running the damn place. So I was like, I can pick up the phone and call this one I knew from P&G, or that one from Deloitte, or this one from IRI. And they might not have the answer. They might not be able to help me directly, but they say, let me help you. Let me introduce you to somebody who can help you with that. Or let me give you a little inside scoop on the culture there, or what's going on there. Or, somebody else called me about this, and I think this is what the opportunity is. So that's my golf course. And by the way, nothing makes me happier than to have like a relationship turn into something that solves somebody's problem. It's not so much about selling something or doing the business. It's like, we have this terrible and we can't fix it. And I'm like, I know somebody who knows how to do that. And I know somebody else who knows how to do it. What if we all get in a room and figure it out? And we make this great friend of ours, who happens to be a woman, look great in the process.
Hey, Michelle. So when I was telling Michelle about you at first, it was when you were back figuring out what you were going to do once you left Deloitte. And you left Deloitte because, they retire you young there.
Yeah.
And then, Michelle, what did you think when suddenly superstar Alison becomes an even bigger superstar?
I think this is what's so cool. And I think so many women need to sit and realize that retirement, we got to throw out this word of retirement. It's like this reinvention, because I'm telling you, so many women that I know that are getting to this part of their career, we're not stopping, right? It's now, let me do it. Let me take all the stuff I learned and apply it toward a new challenge. And I would love for you to spend a few minutes to talk about that transition and excitement, instead of, I'm not sitting at home watching Netflix all day.
Right. And how you did that.
Yes.
Because this, she went to Google, and not in any small way, and she's killing it. So girlfriend, what did you do?
So I will, true confessions here. I don't know how many listeners you have to this podcast, but a couple
millions.
Yeah.
Right.
So
we're working on it.
I invested in this, and it's funny because my husband, who's one of my biggest supporters and not a bad guy, he said to me one day, he goes, you put your mind to doing this, and you got it done. I'm kind of impressed. Now I don't, it's sort of a sideways compliment, but I'll take it from him. So what did I do? Well, I did a couple of things. One, I thought about what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do, and I hired myself a therapist. Big transition in life. Have to leave. I didn't want to leave Deloitte. I would have stayed, another, if they had me, but it's the law, it's the rules. So that's fine. And I was like, okay, I'm not quite ready to go. Your retirement, to your point, Michelle, is kind of a big, but I'm not retiring. I'm really rebooting. Right. And so, by the way, first therapist I talked to twice and figured out that person wasn't for me. Happened to be a man. He didn't get what I was talking about at all. At least that we didn't have a connection. Next, got another one who is literally right out of central casting. She is just this crackerjack of a lady from Beverly Hills who, she probably has a bunch of, Hollywood stars. Probably not, but I like to imagine that she does, and me. And she basically said, let's eliminate what you don't want to do. Let's start. And so then the other thing I did, and she suggested I start meditating. I meditate 10 minutes a day now. I have for over a year.
Wow.
It changes your life, doesn't it?
It does. It's critical. And it doesn't change it in a big way. It doesn't change it like in a flashy way. It suddenly gives you, not suddenly, over time, it gives your head space. And I actually downloaded Headspace. I think Deloitte was paying for it at the time, but it's like $69 a year. And you know what? A lot of people don't need guided meditation. I do. I need the whole, here's what to do, breathe deeply and so on. So I did that. I hired a writer to help me write my bio, and I, well worth the money, not just for getting the right words on the page, but helping me hear myself talk about myself, and her saying, that's interesting, but that's not really what you want to say. Because one of the things I thought I wanted to do was be on boards. And so I hired her, and I did all of these things and did sort of the footwork that it takes to sort of get myself ready for the next thing.
And you were making calls to your friends too, to brainstorm.
And so I talked to you, Fawn, who recommended that I write a book, but it's too early for me to write a book. I'll write a book in the future, I promise. I am going to write a book called A Year in LA from moving here from the East Coast, because that I think is a funny book. I'm just not sure. I have it in me at the moment. And I called lots of friends. And one of the friends I called was a partner at Deloitte. And I said, I have this theory that big tech could use a few of us old gals and guys to help them sort of make their way through enterprise, old school businesses like Walmart, like, Goldman Sachs and so on. Like they have this great technology, but are they translating well in this enterprise world? And in the course of doing that, he introduced me to someone at Google, and that's how I ended up here. And I originally tried to say, I only want to do this part-time. And they were like, no, we really want you to join us. And I'm glad they insisted, because it's such a different culture. The culture is different. The language is different. The business is different. I'm not sure I could learn it fast enough in a part-time way. So I've been sort of immersed in it since September. I know just enough to be dangerous right now, but I'm loving it. And here's the other thing, like I feel in some ways younger, because I feel like I'm really learning. Like my day is 80% learning, maybe 20% contributing right now. So I'm sort of back at the beginning again. And again, being humble. I have to, like, at the end of every day, I got to go like, Alison, relax. And here's the other thing that someone else said to me, by the way, and I also got put on a board. So I got appointed to the board of Cisco with an S. So, when it rains, it pours, right? Like, if you do all the work and you have a little bit of luck and your timing isn't awful, stuff, it started to unfold. So my, and that will be it. I cannot add anything else to my plate right now, because I am like really, but yes, I did I took steps. And some days, it was during the pandemic. Some days I was like, what am I doing? Why, should I really be doing this? Is the world coming to an end? Like, what are we, is this the most important thing to do? But I knew I wanted to keep working. And so, and in some ways, the pandemic sort of paid off in that I could do all of that virtually. And that's where the world is at. So I've, I highly recommend, whether it's a therapist or not, that's not for everybody, but talking to somebody about what you want and what you don't want. One of the things I figured out, and I'll shut up after this. One of the things I figured out is I thought I wanted to start my own, perhaps consulting firm, like do a little consulting here and there. So I set up an LLC. It's called Banyan Grove. It was a name that my husband already had somewhere, so we used that. And the more I talked to people, and the more I looked at what, as people said, write down what you like doing. The more I looked at like what I like doing, it wasn't working by myself. I'm not a lone wolf. And maybe you've picked up on that. I'm a little bit of an extrovert. I like to be with people. I like the group getting together and thinking through the problem. I can't sit by myself in a room and think up the solution to something. That's no fun. So I do have this LLC. I set it up. I've got it. But it turns out I had to sort of go through that process and even set that up to figure out I probably didn't need it. I wasn't going to do that. And that's okay too.
I think it highlights how important, I'll say, in your case, Team Alison, right? Who are those people around you that can be really great sounding boards, challenge your thinking, because that between the meditation and gaining a little bit of clarity and perspective, you were able to make sure that that transition turned out to be, like I always say, you were running towards the right thing that was going to make you feel fulfilled and happy. And it brings joy, right? I mean, just an incredible story.
That's right. And I don't know if you can see this, but that's my moogler cap. So this is what they give you you are a Googler, but for the first 6 months, you're a noogler. And I am told, because I'm a senior noogler, I'm a snoogler. So
they have a name for that.
I mean, I love how we're talking about you being retired and senior, and you're very young, and nobody would even know you're anywhere near as old as you are. You can be a snoogler, and you're just barely middle-aged. You're a moogler.
I'm a moogler. Well, I told them that they needed to give us a whole new name and hat and call us Kooglers, because we were all hired during COVID.
No way. That has too many other meanings.
Yeah, right. I know. And I know. Right.
Let's start a whole new. There's a whole new employee resource group.
Yeah. Right. Hey, Michelle, wrap us up.
Okay, this was incredible. Like, I have so many tips, but I'm going to wrap it up with really short, because people are just going to have to listen, and we have a lot of great material. But I think you gave some really great advice on, I love how to ask for the close, whatever the close is, to get the yes. And just a reminder of how important it is to practice, so that you are building that muscle memory for when you start the game, whatever the game is. And when you're into that point that really matters, that you're prepared. And then I love the reinforcement around the importance of developing real relationships. And I think in the beginning, you gave a couple of tips. You said you're persistent, right? Be persistent. You said, give them the what's in it for me. So the with them, just make sure that's really clear. But the most important one was really listening to understand. And then at the end of that, you made a comment about for fit. It isn't appropriate, because sometimes those relationships, right, they're not meant to be, but you can be really sowing some seeds for something beautiful down the road. And I just appreciate all of your insights and wisdom that you shared today. It was really phenomenal.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Alison.
Thank you, guys. It was great to see you.
Thank you for joining the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Von Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.